nice. And all right, so this week's Torah portion is Parashat Vayigash. It starts chapter 44, verse 18. I love when they start in the middle of a chapter, which we discussed before because the Parshiot came first and the chapters after by not a Jew, but we still use them. Okay, so this Parsha covers sort of the climax of the Joseph story. So it begins with Judah's defense of Benjamin and his insistence that Benjamin definitely did not steal the cup. Joseph cannot throw him in jail. He says, please take me instead. I could not face my father if I go home without Benjamin. And Joseph is so moved by this. I love this. I love visualizing Joseph's emotional turmoil. That sounds mean, but anyway, he feels himself getting emotional, so he sends out all of the Egyptians. He doesn't want them to see him cry, but then he cries so loudly they can hear him anyway outside the room. And so then they go and run and tell Pharaoh, and Pharaoh learns that Joseph is a big crybaby. And I just think that's really funny. But anyway, once he starts crying and he reveals himself to his brothers, then everybody's crying and hugging and kissing and whatever. So it ends well. All's well that ends well, as my grandmother used to say. I wonder where she got it from. Anyway, so then Joseph says, okay, go back to Canaan, get Jacob and all your wives and everybody, and come and live here with me. There's no reason for us to stay separated. I've got a good thing going on here in Egypt. Y'all come settle with me and I'll take care of you. And then sort of, even though he's already offered that, then after the fact, Pharaoh's like, oh, yeah, that's cool. Like Pharaoh gives them land that Joseph kind of already promised them, but it's cool. And then they do, and they all settle in Goshen, which then, of course, later becomes like a slave city. It's where all of the Hebrews are sort of contained throughout their years of slavery as well. But at this time, it's like a blank canvas. It's, it's nice. I think of it as like, like where I live, that used to be all sort of farmland and industrial land, and now it's bougie and built up and nicely settled. And, in 30 years, it'll be the inner city. Like that's how cycles go.
The cycle.
Yeah. And then 30 years after that, somebody will come and gentrify it again, and it'll be bougie again the way it is now. So that's what's happening in Goshen. At least the first two parts of that cycle. I don't think anyone comes and gentrifies it. I don't know what happens after the slaves leave, but there you go. So that's the gist of it. We're getting close to the end of Genesis, because Joseph's story is sort of the culmination of Genesis. We have a couple more. We're gonna see, Jacob die and the blessings and his funeral procession back to Hebron and all of that. But we're getting pretty close to the end here. So there's some things to reflect on here, I think, besides the narrative itself, to think about how we got here and what's coming next in terms of like the whole Torah arc as well, because this is a significant turning point. So, thoughts? Does anybody feel called to start with any particular questions or verses or what have you? No?
Well, I just found it interesting how Joseph came to terms with his brother's deception by saying it was really God's plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I was having an interesting conversation with someone about this the other day, and they were like, they thought that was really obnoxious of Joseph. They were like, this is sort of the self-centeredness that they hated in the first place, that it's all God's plan, it's all about him, blah, blah, blah. But I think the brothers, I could see why they might feel that way on some level, but at the same time, like, it lets them off the hook.
Exactly.
Like, they must be thrilled that Joseph feels that way,
Exactly.
And it's kind of true. I mean, whatever our relationship is with this sort of interventionist God, and even in the narrative itself, we never see God talk to Joseph, but he did have the ability to interpret dreams, and that ability did lead to saving the entire region from starvation. So, like, clearly something was going on there, or like it was for the best for most people in the end anyway.
It also served as a defense mechanism for Joseph.
Right.
Then he didn't have to struggle with feeling being betrayed.
Right. And that's something we see throughout his narrative as well, that even like it's not just about forgiving his brothers or making this reunion less painful, but that's what's given him strength all through, this idea that like this is all part of God's plan. Even though God doesn't talk to him, he has faith, he prays, and that carries him through the dark days in the dungeon. It makes him good at his slave job, which he could like be bitter about, but he like rises to head boy or whatever in Potiphar's house. And like that clearly comes from this like security in like it'll all turn out okay because this is all part of God's plan. And I don't know, there are so many cliches I could throw in here about God's, like, if it's not okay, it's not the end yet. The story with the footprints, and God was carrying Joseph through, and whatever, like that kind of stuff that just apply really well here.
And I guess I see it as his being resilient.
Right, but faith in God can be a significant source of resiliency,
Absolutely, they're not opposing.
Right. Yeah, I think I've mentioned that before, that one of the things in resiliency studies, like in the Holocaust or Cambodia, that I've looked at is if they had a faith background to begin with, they're more likely to survive and thrive as survivors, as opposed to,
as well as I think you also added a strong family.
Right. That affects it too. And often those things go hand I shouldn't say that. I was gonna say often, they go hand in hand. And sometimes that's true. The family that prays together stays together, but sometimes also a strong religious home can be oppressive. And so, what I don't want to put too much stock in those things being connected, but
they can be. It's not. Yeah.
Yes, and they often are in these resiliency studies.
But they don't have to be.
They don't have to be. Yeah, Joel.
Something that I've been thinking about is this. Of course, this parsha is Vayigash. And the word Goshen, it's not the same root, but it's very, very similar.
Well, I never thought about that before.
Actually, I haven't been able to find anyone who kind of agrees with this. It's so, of course, in the Hebrew, the two letters are Gimel and Shin. And I'm trying to work that through. So possibly, of course, Goshen, it's known as Goshen today.
Right.
It's been known as Goshen for maybe since the
3,000 years.
I don't know. And of course, it also means to draw near. That's Vayigash,
Right.
draw near. And when I look at the geography, I see that Goshen is sort of towards the northeast of the Nile River Delta. So it's so they would be drawn towards the northeast to be drawn to come near to. So, kind of makes a lot of sense.
But wait, I wanted to look at the first verse again. Hold on. Gosh, okay, went up to him. Approached him. Okay. Oh, I lost Goshen. Okay, so the first place that Goshen appears, we've got 45:10. And Rabbeinu Bachya says he makes this connection similarly. He doesn't quite connect it to Vayigash, but in the verse, he said, "Vayishavta be'eretz Goshen v'heita karov elai," that you'll dwell in the land of Goshen and you will be near to me or close to me. And then the Rabbeinu says, the land of Goshen is close to the capital of Egypt, and Joseph was aware that his father would not want to reside in the capital, so he arranged for this close settlement. So that well, I don't know. That is interesting. I never thought about those words that they sound alike before.
So what does Vayigash mean?
It means like to approach.
Okay, so where it says Judah went up to him, so that's the translation of the beginning of
Yeah.
Gotcha.
There's one more connection. I just put it in the chat. Just following up on what you said, is the word karov.
Right. Also means to come close.
Near. And that's the same word we use. You may have heard korban. 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 All of our sacrifices. That's what korban means. So when we make sacrifices, we're being drawn near to our Creator. We're drawn near to what Rabbi Goldstein just described as our Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. We're being drawn near. Or like now, we've been drawn near 12 o'clock to come study together.
Yes.
Interesting idea. Draw near.
Barov.
So when we're drawing near, Joel, we're drawing nearer to God.
Yes.
And the act of sacrifice is an act of attempting to draw nearer
Yes.
to the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Or prayer. Prayer.
For prayer.
We're drawn near. Or if we sacrifice the goat or the pigeon, whatever we got.
Chocolate.
Or chocolate. Hermits. Been catching up. I fell behind again on DaFiomi. I've been catching up and read several pages yesterday of can you burn your chametz on the day before Passover with something that has become ritually impure? Can you still put them all together on the altar together to burn it? And I don't know. I like tune out when the rabbis get so into these temple laws because the temple already didn't exist when they were writing them, and they super are not going to exist for us. What?
So when you burn hametz, you're doing it as a sacrifice? I thought you were doing it to cleanse your house of hametz.
Well, it's both. I mean, you need to cleanse your house of chametz, but you can you could just throw it out. You could people sell anything that's still edible. they sell to a Gentile
Right.
for the duration, things like that. But there was a there was a mincha offering, and the mincha is meal is flour. So there was a korban of mincha, and like so you could bring your chametz for that, but there are like certain, if you're bringing the sack of flour from the back of your pantry as your mincha offering on that last day before Passover, but the sack of flour, I don't know, like you've discovered that a mouse has gotten to it. How impure is it then that that a mouse, which is impure, has bit a corner hole? Like you don't know then how impure the whole sack is, and then like I don't know. So then they go into ridiculous side conversations about impurity and how it passes from one thing to another, and rabbis. And they go, I don't know. We'll learn when Elijah comes. Yes, Joel.
Do people here know what shmor matzah is?
Shmora.
Shmora? What, Rabbi, why don't you explain that?
Shmora matzah is just super matzah. It's the big round darker matzah that like Chabad gives out.
Oh yeah.
So
they sent one to my mother.
Let's say you live in Brooklyn, unemployment is very high. They might send you out to Kansas or to Iowa. And what your job is, you have to live there and you have to watch the field. That's what shmor means. It's like shomer Shabbat, people who watch the Sabbath. So the shmora matzah, they actually watch the wheat growing. That one of the farmers, he might be eating a ham sandwich for lunch. Might drop it. I mean, stranger things happen in life.
True.
So he watches, he makes sure everything's nice and kosher.
Never heard that one.
So, of course, when we get into stuff, and Rabbi Goldstein, I have the same questions, where all of us, we're not so frum, we don't, whatever. So, but it's the process. I think when, let's say there's a scientist trying to learn something, he has to be very, very thorough. And, these questions really will come up. For example, sturgeon does have scales, but it's not the right kind of scales. Sturgeon is not a kosher fish. It's right in there.
Right.
So anyway, that's how it all applies. Like, of course, we can delve into it more, delve into it less, but we're really inquiring about stuff that we have no idea about. We can learn more.
Right. Yeah, and the temple is so recently destroyed at the time of the Talmud that I get why they continue to discuss those laws, and then so much of our other practices are then based on that. Like mincha is still to this day what we call afternoon prayer, because that's when you brought the mincha korban, was in the afternoon. So there's these things that build on, but I just can't help that my eyes kind of gloss over at that stuff. Anyway, let's back to Torah. Let's see.
I just want to say, I think that's the interesting thing about studying Torah is everyone comes to this from their own lens. It may be overlapping lenses, but I think that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why we study Torah. That's why we study Torah together.
Mhm.
That's an essential part of understanding.
Exactly. Like I see it my way, but I learned so much from hearing all of you talk about, your perspective.
Right. Okay. What do you think about Judah's defense of Benjamin, of this whole speech that Judah gives? Do you have thoughts on that?
Just for one thing, he's not the same person he was when they threw Joseph in the pit.
Yeah. That's true.
He seemed really sincere to me, that he was really concerned for his father and willing to give up his wives, his property, his children, and be Joseph's slave, not knowing he was his brother, because he really couldn't face going back to his father and watching his father die in front of him, because he hadn't taken every action that he could. And as Terry just said, he was not the same person.
I agree. And I also struggle a little bit with how much of this speech is about Jacob, really, and not about Benjamin or Joseph. I don't know. I just always can't help but dwell on that a little bit every year when we read it, or, as a kid listening to the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat music, how much, he mentions the other brother that disappeared and like what a mistake that was. They never really expressed remorse over not having Joseph anymore. They realize what a mistake it was as a means of dealing with the resentment of like the lack of love from their father.
And also from their fathers. I think they feel badly because it hurt their father.
Right. That they thought it would just take Joseph out of the picture and then they wouldn't have to deal with the competition for their father's love. But then it just made their father very sad, and like the plan didn't really work the way they wanted it to. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to add, not that they really thought it out.
Right, sure.
It kind of is the evolution of moral development.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. Can you say more about that?
Well, I mean, our frontal cortex, we all say, it doesn't really mature till 2021. And I don't know the ages of the brothers, but what they did was rash without thought to consequences. And now they're older. Judah seems to be one who has really developed a moral conscience. And we're seeing that play out, that development and that play out now.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
So when you say it seems to indicate he's thinking more about his father, do you mean really thinking about his father's feelings, or thinking about, oh, what's daddy going to say if I come back without Benjamin, kind of thing? I mean,
No, I think, well, definitely a little bit of both, but I do believe that he is sincere about being concerned for his father's feelings. And just like from Joseph's perspective, I think it speaks to his ability to forgive and his faith in God, that he doesn't like, that he's able to just accept that as proof enough of the brothers' remorse and willingness to be better people, that they don't actually say, like, we miss our brother, we feel
Right.
bad that we damaged him, we can't do that to another brother, that it's still about like, about Jacob, about his feelings, about their relationship with him, and all of those pieces are valid and authentic, but I just, like, I don't see in it, if I were Joseph, and maybe this is, you know, a sign of my own shortcomings, but I would feel like I'm not actually hearing an apology from you, so I don't think we can move past this.
Okay.
Am I alone in that? That's okay.
Well,
No, I'm
No, I
looking-
think you're right. Go ahead, Debbie.
No, I was just reading past that again to see when he tells them that he's Joseph, if he, so go ahead while I'm reading, David.
Well, as I was reading it, what came to me was not only is Judah not the same person he was, but Joseph is showing himself to be somebody really other than I had planned on. And it's more like he's coming close to saying, yo, I'm the Messiah. God sent me to do all this stuff, and I'm going to, relieve the famine, and I've taken care of this, and everything was God's plan, and I am his instrument. And don't worry over your trivial little acts. It was all, you really were just little pawns in the hands of God, whom by association is my good buddy, or at least somebody that I've got a close connection with that you don't have.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what was coming through to me as somebody who's just one step away from being nutso, one more step, and he thinks that he walks on water, which let's not go there right now. That's what occurred to me. And I may be alone in that, but obviously
Maybe
Terry likes it.
That helps, that like his own ego is so big, he doesn't need
Yeah.
the apology
Yeah.
from
Apology from you peons? Don't be ridiculous.
You
not
know,
important
Dave,
enough.
I'm sorry.
You're not important enough.
I saw that too, and I just dismissed it. And you were absolutely right.
No, that's how I read it.
Yeah.
And what you're saying about him being one step away from being nuts, so it's interesting in you haven't been attending the mysticism adult ed that we've been having, but Juliet and I had a little email exchange, and what's the difference between mysticism and superstition, and one step away from nutsoism also.
Psychosis.
Yes. So I guess in this case, maybe the step is that God is speaking or is doing things with him, as opposed to some guy on the corner of Brooklyn that thinks that God is talking to him and really isn't. I guess that's the difference here. But
Well, if
yes.
it worked out, God was there, so we've got the proof more or less.
right. I think
Because God
that's
doesn't actually appear here. God doesn't say anything at all in these chapters.
but we have the evidence of God's influence, I think. Like that's the distinction between prophet and madman, I think, is like the end result, right? So like, and I've brought this up before in our previous Torah study times, that like in the beginning, when Joseph's only interpreting his own dreams and they haven't happened yet, he sounds like an arrogant nut job. Like, who's to say that these dreams about the star and the moon bowing down to the sun or whatever it is, that means that your whole family's going to bow down to you someday? That's crazy. But then when he interprets the dreams of the baker and the butler, and then those things happen, you know, then it's valid, right? Like, then we've crossed the line into definitive prophecy.
And of course, his brothers do come.
And his brothers do come and bow down to him, right?
So.
I also, this is stepping away from Torah again for a moment, but the mysticism thing made me think some of the things, I don't remember now exactly which part of what Rabbi Dennis was saying on Sunday, but like about visions and everything, and that you're not supposed to dabble in it until you're a bit stable in your own life and things like that. I was listening to a podcast recently about, I don't know, somebody did a study of rabbis and hallucinogenics. And like one of the stipulations had to be that they had never done them before. So they had a hard time finding rabbis that were willing to try drugs but hadn't already done them before. That was interesting. Anyway, and so the guy on the podcast, Judaism Unbound, is one of my regular podcasts. So this was a guest that they were interviewing, had been part of this study, and he kept emphasizing that like these drugs are still illegal, they're still dangerous. I don't recommend them for like recreational use in terms of like just using them to get high, but at the same time, he has set up an organization around spiritual practice and around mysticism, preparing for a time when these hallucinogenics may be legal, that they will have a place in spiritual practice, and like how he's going to structure this religious organization around that drug use. And again, so like that line just feels really fine of what you decide is spiritual or recreational, legality aside.
Well, a little bit like very deep meditation.
Right. Which hopefully doesn't send you to a place you can't come back from. But
Oh, yes. Yeah, but from what I've read, people can achieve an altered state.
right. Right. And meditation can be kind of mystical, that a way of
Right.
being beyond your body. When I was in Poland, I went with a Zen group, so we would meditate in Auschwitz every morning.
Oh.
And I'm not a big I like guided meditations, but I can't do like the transcendental or the mantras, which was what this was, is they would just read the names, and we were supposed to just like meditate on the sound of the names like washing over us, and it was too freeform for me, and I would doze off or just be cold and think like I'm ready to not be sitting here on the Polish ground in November anymore. But I had a friend who grew up Buddhist on the trip, and so he was more able to get into the meditative zone, and he I don't know. One morning I like looked up after as our meditation was ending, and he had like taken off his coat and his hat, and he was like sweating. And he's like, that's what happens when I get into that zone. I'm like outside of my body, and it gets like I get hot from the inside out from meditating. And I was like, it just was really interesting to me how
Mhm.
once he reached that other plane, whatever that plane is,
Yeah,
he like was so disconnected to his body and to the physical weather around him that,
yeah. It must have been fascinating to actually witness.
yeah. Yeah, Joel.
I've had those same questions. Like, for example, extreme example might be L. Ron Hubbard, who founded Scientology. And he has all these ideas about being thetans and from this planet, whatever. And
Right.
here's the problem with all this stuff. And not only people who are far out, but even people who are slightly off the pathway, slightly off the derech. And it's this. Uh, right in our Torah, we have words that have been preserved that really bring us back to the beginning of time. And I can really follow that and not come up with any logical reason to disagree. And when people come up with these weird ideas, even in our own faith, we have people who they come up with a lot of their own little stuff, and I can't see where they came, where it really came from, other than, oh, I have a feeling. Now, sure, a feeling is your opinion. If that's your opinion and it makes you happy, that's great. But I think that here we have, certainly in the Torah, we can follow stuff through, and we can really see where it comes from, and it really reinforces. Like, for example, you just spoke about 45:3, and here there's all this charade, and and oh, we have an old father at home and a brother, and at 45:3, and Joseph said to his brethren, I am Joseph. In the Hebrew, it's Ani Yosef. Now, to me, that sounds almost identical to Ani Adonai, which is so common to us. And whenever I hear that, it just reminds us, hey, it's time to stop the nonsense, and this is just how it is. Let's be authentic people. Ani Adonai. And what God is saying is what Joseph is saying. I think this story is modeled after Ani Adonai, I am God. And it really says this, the God or Joseph, they're really calling attention that Yaakov is the father to all these brothers. And to have fighting between brothers, that just isn't the way to go. And then if you turn to the Haftarah, which is Ezekiel 37, 15, it's almost the same story. And what they're doing is there's a whole discussion about bringing the two tribes together of Joseph and of Yehudah. And if you read that, it's so short and so beautiful. It really says we're going to take those two sticks, the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph, and we're going to bring them together, and they're going to become one. It's the same story as 45:3. It's really saying, let's bring these two brothers together, and we're all kind of descended from one creator. And that's why I'm saying, whenever I read that stuff in the Torah, I just can't conceive of any other way. It's not like you have your own creator whose name is Baal, and I have my own creator. No, it all comes from one source, including all the animals, including the trees, including everything on this earth comes from one source. And science bears that out. Okay, you look at electrons, look at protons, like everything. really comes from one source. And our whole Torah, if you look at beginning to end, it kind of spells it out step by step. And sure, we run into trouble. Here's the trouble. The trouble is the brothers. By the way, these brothers are all the children of Jacob, okay? And here they are all together, and they're all one, as we are all one. And isn't that our message in our liturgy over and over and over? Okay, we're one, we're all one. So here's Ron Hubbard, he's coming up with something. It's not of one, it's something coming out of his own brain. And also we have the Moshiachim Yehudim, okay?
Let's not go there.
These are Messianic Jews.
Yeah.
Okay. And most of them are not people from the Jewish faith. We have a lot of other people, but I think a lot of them, if I really listen to them carefully, they're going to come to some point. Oh, I had a feeling. I was in my dorm room and, blah, 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 whatever it is. Okay. If someone can go into Torah and pick out verse by verse, we can say, no, that's not what it means. And I think that people coming from that point of view, they have to study more. They have to inquire. And that's what we're doing. And by the way, that's Rabbi Goldstein's favorite word, is to inquire. It's lidrosh. It's the same root as drash, to create a drash.
I do love the word drash.
Okay, and that's what rabbis do. Rabbis they're constantly looking at the words and creating an inquiry of the words. So that's my answer. That's the difference between a cult and a religion.
So I have, go ahead, Dave.
No,
Okay, go ahead, Dave. No, go.
All right. Well, I have a question, if I can leave what Joel said and go to the end of chapter 46, around about verse 31 to the end of that section. And why does Joseph tell his brothers that they should say, if they are asked, what have you done for a living, that they've been keepers of cattle forever and ever, because shepherds are an abomination? Why would shepherds be an abomination in Goshen or Egypt? What's that about?
Where does
It's
Very end of 46.
Say that again, Debbie, please.
The very end of of chapter 46.
I
Okay,
see where
thank
it tells him, where he tells them to say you're shepherds, but I don't see. Oh wait, shepherds are abhorrent to Egyptians. Okay, I found it.
Yeah, it says in 33, it says, if Pharaoh shall call you and say, what is your occupation? 34, that you shall say, thy servants have been keepers of cattle from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. That's a translation in the Sonsino
Yeah,
edition, edited by Hertz.
Rashi says they regarded sheep as deities.
Really?
Yeah, so
When I read that, I was thinking about the old West, how farmers and livestock owners would butt heads because of land.
oh, cowmen and the farmer should be free.
Yeah, that's it. That's what
And that Egypt, with its annual flooding and how important land was to crop growers because of that. But the Egyptians had cattle too. I mean, that the plagues hit that, and the
Right.
so I wasn't sure. That's what I thought of.
Ibn Ezra says the Egyptians of those times were vegetarians like modern Hindus, but that can't possibly be true, because that's one of the complaints in the desert, is the Israelites say, in Egypt we had meat, or at least fish. And
I
then
have the women's commentary,
Yeah.
and it says here that statement, Egyptians find shepherds abhorrent, is not supported by Egyptian records. Moreover, even in the biblical account, Pharaoh has his own herds. Possibly it refers only to non-Egyptian herds. And then it goes on to say maybe the abomination, the Egyptians find it an abomination to eat together with the Hebrews. But the point seems to be that Jacob and his family will be allowed to live in a separate region from the Egyptian shepherds and maintain their own cultural identity.
Right.
And that's what I was thinking, and maybe they wouldn't be threatened by the newcomers quite as much because they would be separate and not try to take over their lands or something.
Okay, and that would be the abomination or abhorrence.
Joel, interesting information you sent in the chat.
Thank you.
Huh. Yeah, that is interesting. I love when I love thinking about
Yeah.
ancient farming practices that could be so based on. I mean, we
Mhm.
think of like modern ecology, environmentalism as such a modern science, but it's only modern in the industrial world. Like, if it was their livelihood, of course they knew things like a foreign animal would be devastating to,
Yeah.
or
It
the
was
introduction
I
animals.
think
that. Go ahead.
the
That's
difference
the
between the way sheep and cattle graze. Sheep apparently graze right down to the
Yeah.
roots, whereas cattle
Yep.
leave a little bit to regrow.
Yeah, the sheep kill. Those are the range wars that you were talking
Yeah.
about.
Did you notice the interesting verses? First, they say, oh, when you go down there, don't tell them you're shepherds. Make sure you tell them you're cattle raisers. Okay. And 4 or 5 verses later, the Pharaoh says, well, what do you guys do? What's your occupation? Oh, come on. You didn't remember? In other words, they set themselves up.
Hmm.
So, of course, the sheep absolutely were deities, because when it comes time for Passover, they actually took the Paschal lamb 2 days before the evening of Passover, and they tied the Paschal lamb to their beds, little rope, they tied him in there. And their midrashes, the Egyptians came along and they say, hey, what are you doing with our gods? And they said, oh, in 2 days, we're going to slaughter them and eat them. Which also, there's something known as the Apis bull, A-P-I-S, Apis bull. And these bulls, of course, were deities in Egypt. And they even have their own pyramids and stuff, and they embalm them. And I mean, these guys were nuts over these bulls.
Interesting.
I mean, it's just all throughout the internet, and photographs and this and that. And of course, that's one of the reasons why we stood out, because we said, no, we can't have all these gods, because it doesn't work that way.
Right. Yeah, Dave.
Something I just, as I was rereading this passage, I didn't see it the first time. In chapter 46, just before that section about the cattle and sheep, verse 30, it begins, Vayomer Yisrael, and Israel said unto Joseph, up till now, it's all been Jacob. And now all of a sudden, Israel?
In the beginning of Joseph's narratives, there were also some parts where it goes back and forth
Oh, okay.
between calling him Jacob and Israel.
I just wonder if there's a significance of when they used Israel, when they used Jacob, or is it, was it written by, was this by the E school or the J school, getting their shots in?
Yeah, my guess is that that's the Peshat. That's the, I don't know, what do you, like, the most correct answer is that it has to do with which author, like which tradition it came from when it was all woven together. But I'm sure there's also some, I'm not seeing anything in the commentaries right now, but I'm sure there are extrapolations to be made based on when he's called which thing.
Somebody sent a term paper.
Yeah, for sure.
Or a doctorate.
Senior sermon for rabbinical school.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, none of these suggest a reason for Israel here. Lots of commentary on why Jacob's gonna die now. Why he says, now I can die.
I've seen your face. You're alive. Now I can die. I wouldn't have actually put that together myself. I would have gone, now I can live. All right.
I guess it's the knowing that your children have grown up successfully. So your job as a parent can be done, I guess. I can't remember the exact lyric, but in the finale for Les Mis, there's something like that too. After Cosette gets married and Jean Valjean's like, all right, I can die now. Any last thoughts, questions, feelings, reflections as we come toward the end of Bereshit? We still have like I said, we have a couple more, but we have one more. But but we're getting toward this is the climax. No, that's okay too. I think it's I don't know. Interesting is such a boring word, but whatever. I think it's interesting how we've followed this family line theoretically from Adam, but mostly from Abraham. And they've gone to Egypt, back to Canaan, back to the north, back to Hebron. They've traveled all over, but Hebron remains like home base, or the land of Israel is the Holy Land. But we haven't really spent a whole lot of time there. And now we're stuck in Egypt, and next thing we know, we're going to be enslaved there for 200 years. So just something to think about in the next few weeks as we move into the Exodus narrative. Final thought, Little Nacht. I just read today, maybe I knew this and forgot, but because I do think Little Nacht is an interesting concept, but there is a minhag for Orthodox Jews who don't tear on Shabbat. So they tear their entire year's worth of Shabbat toilet paper on Christmas Eve so that it will be in no way connected to anything. Like, this night should not be for anything fun or studious or worthwhile in any way, shape, or form. So they spend the night tearing toilet paper and, separating every square.
Can they reuse it? Save it?
Yeah, like then they set it aside. So each Shabbat they have their pre-torn squares for the rest of the year.
Oh, now I'm with it. Okay.
Yeah.
That
So they just
could be a
separate the
good
square.
business venture for someone. You could have like pre-torn,
I'm sure that exists.
what?
I'm sure that exists, pre-torn toilet paper. Like,
Or Kleenex.
yeah, you pull out of the box, but it's flushable. There's a story. I listened to another Jewish podcast that did an episode on the war on Christmas, and some of the episode is absurd. There's one woman who won't say Christmas or Santa Claus. She's strange. But the first interview of the episode is with an old Orthodox guy in Toronto or Montreal, I guess Montreal. And he tells this very funny story. Part of it's his accent, which I can't quite emulate, but he tells this funny story about how Christmas was always Christmas and Easter are particularly difficult times for Jews because the Christians would get all revved up and do a pogrom or whatever. And so one day he's out on the front stoop playing with a new toy set, a toy tool, hammer and whatever that little kids will have that he just got for Hanukkah. And a neighborhood bully walks by and he talks about how his whole life he'd been prepared for these sorts of interactions, Christmas and Easter, when the Christians get all fervored up and they accuse Jews of killing Jesus, that the prepared answer is no, the Romans did it. So he tells a story. He's out playing with his new tool set that he just got for Hanukkah, and the neighborhood bully walks by and sneers at him and said, something about Christmas is coming up and the Jews killed Jesus. And the man says, I knew in my head, I had been prepared for this my whole life. I was supposed to say, no, the Romans did it. Instead, what I said was, no, tool set for Gary. And that was the best Christmas he'd ever had.
I like that.
And that's what I think about every Christmas. Gary. So with that, we are going to actually go to my sister-in-law's house and have Christmas Eve with our nieces. But
enjoy.
Have a good Nitzelnacht, everybody.
Thank you.
And I'll see you next week.
Everybody.
Till next week, Nickelnack.
Next time we'll remember that it's Thursday.
Yes, okay. Have a good one.
Bye.